I'll turn this over to Easter to say a few opening words, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much.
All right, so I'd like to ask the interpreter currently on the Spanish channel to commence translation of the meeting. Live translation can be heard on the Spanish channel. To join the Spanish channel, click on the interpretation icon on your Zoom toolbar. It looks like the globe. Once you join the Spanish channel, we recommend you shut off the main audio so you can clearly hear the Spanish translation.
Ahora me gustaría preguntarle y pedir al intérprete que corrientemente se encuentre en el canal de español que empiece sus interpretaciones. Interpretación en vivo está disponible y pueden oír esta interpretación en español en el canal de español. Para unirse al canal de español pueden hacer clic en el icono de interpretación que aparece en la barra de funciones de Zoom, que parece como un globo. Una vez que se unan al canal de español, también recomendamos que apaguen su audio primario para que claramente puedan oír la interpretación al español.
All right, I will now just take one moment to move our second translator over to the Spanish channel, and then I will, once that is done, I'll pass it off to Malcolm. So just one moment, please. Okay, Malcolm, thank you so much. We're ready to start.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second community meeting for the City of Santa Rosa's Water Supply Alternatives Plan, which is focused on exploring Santa Rosa's water future and increasing the city's water supply resiliency and reliability. I'm Malcolm Smith with Data Instincts, and I'll be moderating and facilitating tonight's community meeting. And I do want to thank you all for joining us tonight. As a reminder to tonight's presenters, panelists, and members of the public, please speak slowly and very clearly to ensure the interpreters can convey all of tonight's content in Spanish. And Esther Ledesma with the City of Santa Rosa is going to provide some information now about how to participate in tonight's meeting. Esther?
Yes, thank you. As community members join the meeting, you'll be participating as an attendee. Your microphone and camera will be muted. Only today's panelists will be viewed during the meeting. The City of Santa Rosa is committed to creating a safe and inclusive environment free from disruption. Hateful speech or actions won't be tolerated. Everyone is expected to participate respectfully or they will be removed. If necessary, we will also immediately end the meeting. This meeting is being recorded and will be placed on the city website following the meeting. At the end of the presentation, Malcolm will open up the meeting for public questions and comments.
Okay, thank you, Easter. And once again, we're very grateful for everyone who's joining us tonight and for your time. Your participation and input are important to the city as we discuss Santa Rosa's water future. This is our second community meeting on this topic. In the first community meeting, which took place on October 26th, we provided information about Santa Rosa's water use and water supplies, its improvements in water use efficiency, the impacts of droughts, and the project scope of work, goals, and approach. Links to that meeting's video recording and presentation slides are available on Santa Rosa's Our Water Future webpage, which is at srcity.org/ourwaterfuture. It's in the past meetings section. Tonight, we'll focus on the details of the approach to studying potential water supply options. To start us off, we will have opening comments by Santa Rosa Water Director Jennifer Burke, and after that, we'll provide an overview of the agenda and the topics we plan to cover tonight. Director Burke?
Thank you, Malcolm, and good evening, everyone. And I too want to thank you all for being here tonight. As was mentioned, we appreciate that you've taken the time to attend and participate in our second community meeting to discuss Our Water Future, which is an incredibly important project, not only to myself, but to the entire water department. I think you heard a little bit from Malcolm about what we covered in the first community meeting. And What we learned from those that attended the first meeting really helped shape what you'll see tonight in the updated goals, supply options, and criteria. Tonight, we will update you on the work that's been completed since we last met. We'll share the study parameters that will be used to identify our best options for new water supply. We'll explain the water supply resiliency goal, the full list of supply options to be studied, the criteria that we are planning to use to assess those options, and the study methodology for using the criteria. After each section, we'll pause to invite you to ask questions and provide your feedback. We really are looking forward to your feedback and input, as this really helps shape this project for us. When we can, we'll respond. Where we can't, we'll take in your suggestions and incorporate that as we go forward with this project. So why are we here tonight? As you are likely very aware, this winter we've received much needed rain to replenish our local water supply reservoirs. And that's very good news. However, since 2005, we've had 3 droughts. And climate change models predict we're likely to continue to see frequent and perhaps more severe droughts in the future. With this in mind, Santa Rosa Water is looking for the best options for expanding and diversifying our water supply. This will help us mitigate some impacts of future droughts and also be prepared for sudden emergencies that might be caused by earthquakes or other disasters. So again, tonight we'll share the study approach and the other information discussed above and ask for your feedback and questions. Thank you again for attending, and thank you in advance for participating in the discussion. We look forward to the information we'll be getting from you this evening, and I really appreciate you spending your time on this project. With that, I'll hand this back to Malcolm to introduce our first presenter. Malcolm?
Thank you, Director Burke. I'm going to sort of recap a little bit of that. This evening, we are going to provide the update on the project's progress and share with you how the city is planning to study water supply options. And during the presentation, there will be several opportunities for the community to ask the panel questions, make comments, and offer ideas. After all of the presentations, there will be another opportunity to provide community input. Now, our presenters tonight are Colin Close, Santa Rosa Water's Senior Water Resources Planner, and Jen Kidson, Planner for Woodard and Curran. In addition, we have other project team members and city staff available to answer questions as needed, and we'll introduce them as they join the panel. As Director Burke mentioned, tonight's agenda includes the background information, a project update covering what's been accomplished so far, the study approach, which will include details about the water supply goal, the list of potential water supplies to be studied, the evaluation criteria that will be used, and the study methodology to determine the feasibility of each water supply option. Then we'll have time for questions and answers, and after that, next steps. As I mentioned, you will have opportunities to provide your input at various points during and after the presentation. And I want to note that you are most welcome and encouraged to ask questions, make comments, or suggest ideas. To allow as many participants to speak as possible, each person's comments will be limited to 2 minutes. But if there is time remaining after everyone has had a chance to contribute, then you'll have an opportunity to address the panel a second time. So now I would like to introduce Colin Close, the city's Senior Water Resources Planner and Project Manager for this effort. Colin will present a brief bit of background information, and following his presentation, Jen Kidson from the Woodard and Curran team will present the project update and the study approach. Colin?
Thank you so much, Malcolm. Really appreciate that. Welcome again to everybody. Really glad to have you here. I'm going to provide just a little bit of background information. If you would like more, please do go to our webpage and look for the past meetings section, as has been mentioned before. And in that, you'll find the PowerPoint slides from our last meeting and the recording as well. So this will be just a short introductory presentation, but we have a lot more information about our water supplies and our water history in that previous presentation. Next slide, please. So Santa Rosa is a fairly good-sized city. We have 176,000 residents, and we deliver about 6.3 billion gallons of water per year for the urban customers, homes and businesses, schools and government offices. We don't deliver drinking water to agriculture. We do provide some recycled water to some agricultural customers, but not drinking water. We have 3 sources of water for our urban customers, and we have 23 reservoirs. These are very large above ground tanks. Water gets to your home or your business or your school through 600 miles of drinking water pipe, and most of that is underneath the street. So you drive over it every day and probably don't realize it. We also have about 600 miles of sanitary sewer pipe, and that collects wastewater from your home or business. That's from sinks and tubs, from toilets and from industrial processes. And that all flows by gravity to the west. And that would be the left side of this map you see, this photo of Santa Rosa. Out there on the west side, we have the Laguna Treatment Plant, and that recycles water. It recycles water from Santa Rosa's wastewater, as well as Rohnert Park and Cotati and Sebastopol and the Southwest Sanitation District. So altogether each year, we recycle and reuse about 7 billion gallons of water. So that's just a snapshot of Santa Rosa. Next slide, please. I mentioned I would tell you what our 3 water supplies are, and here they are. We buy water from Sonoma Water, and they provide water to quite a few cities and water agencies in our area. Most of our water comes from them. They get their water primarily from the Russian River system. So they store water in Lake Sonoma, they release it to Dry Creek, and then it flows to the Russian River. And then Sonoma Water takes it back out with large collectors. They're like very large groundwater type wells, but they take water out from below the Russian River about 80 feet or so. So the water comes out very pure. It's been naturally filtered. We also have city wells. So we produce some of our own water with a couple of wells. And we use a little bit of recycled water in our city urban setting. And if you add it all up, in years where we have normal rainfall, average rainfall, we have almost 10.3 billion gallons of water available. So how much do we actually use? Next slide, please. In 2020, that was the year just before this drought. We use 6.3 billion gallons of water. So you can see we don't use as much as we have available in our average rainfall years. Most of that water is used by our residents to cook and to clean, to do laundry, to water their yards. So about 2 out of 3 gallons. About 1 out of 4 gallons is used by our other customers, commercial sites, businesses, institutions. Those are things like schools, nonprofits, government agencies, industrial processes. We do have some industrial activity in Santa Rosa. And then the irrigation of landscapes at all of those sites. So that's about 1 out of 4 gallons. And then about 1 out of 12 gallons is used for purposes not by our customers, but by the city for different reasons, such as fighting fires or flushing our main, all of our main pipes, or testing our fire hydrants. And then we also have leaks, and we fix those leaks, but we do lose some water that way as well. So about 1 out of 12 gallons isn't water that we sell, but it is water that gets used. So when we look to the future and plan how much water we're going to need, we have to take all of these kinds of uses into account. We have to make sure we have enough for our residents, for our businesses and industries and institutions, and also for the other kinds of processes and procedures that need to be done to keep our water system working. So where did our water come from? 93% in 2020 came from Sonoma water. That's very typical for us, about 93%. About 6% came from our wells. Again, that's very typical for Santa Rosa. And about 1% is recycled water used for some landscaping. So how are we doing? Just so you know, from 1990 to 2020, our population grew by 57%. So that means for every 100 people we had in 1990, we had 157 people in 2020. So that's quite an increase in population. How has our water use changed in that time? Next slide. What you can see here is that our water use has gone down, even though our population went up 57%. If we look at 1990, that's the dark bar on the far left. And you compare it to 2020, that's the orange bar on the right. In 2020, we used 14% less water. And that's for all uses. 2004 was our highest water use year. And in 2020, we used 20% less than we did in 2004. This is because we've had exceptional water use efficiency programs, both on the building side with building codes and building requirements, as well as on our water use efficiency side from the water department, helping existing customers reduce their water use. So this is a really wonderful achievement. So if we are using less water than we have access to in regular years, and our water use has gone down, why are we here? Next slide, please. Again, in average years, we have plenty of supply, even as we look out to 2045. But what about years when there's drought? As you saw with this recent drought, it means we have to conserve across our whole region, Santa Rosa and the other cities around us, to make sure we have enough water. We know with climate change that this is likely to happen more frequently and potentially worse drought. Next slide. This is one way to understand how bad the last drought was, the one we're just coming out of. The green line shows the average storage in Lake Sonoma for drinking water supply each month, and that's a 30-year average. So we take all the months over the last 30 years, all of the Octobers, And that's the average, October, November, December. So you can see it repeats itself because we're just showing the average over 30 years. The dotted black line is the lowest month of storage, no matter what year that occurred in. Most of those lowest months have occurred in the last 10 years. The red line marks a place where if the lake goes below that red line and we are out of the rainy season completely, the state can require that Sonoma Water reduce delivery by 30%. And that's because if the water storage goes below 100,000 acre feet, that's about 1 year supply or potentially less. We haven't gone below that line very often. We did this winter, but not for long, thankfully. The blue line shows the past 3 water years from October to September each year, the actual storage. So you can see that for almost 3 years, we were below the average storage. And for almost 2 years, we were below the lowest month. And again, with climate change, we know this is likely to continue to happen either more frequently or more severely. And Santa Rosa wants to be ready. Next slide. If we do get into a severe shortage where we have to reduce deliveries ourselves by 30% or more, because Sonoma Water has had to reduce deliveries, you can see that's quite a gap. The gray bars show how much water we expect our community is going to need over the next 20 years with population growth and businesses and more parks. And the blue bars show how much water we would have if we had a shortage of 30%. That would be a worse shortage than we've experienced in Santa Rosa. And again, we need to be prepared. Next slide. So we decided early last year to undertake the development of a water supply alternatives plan. And the purpose is to find the best way to increase our water supply reliability. Make sure we're prepared for severe droughts and emergencies, and that we're ready to adapt to climate change. And the approach you'll hear a lot about tonight in great detail. But just in a quick summary, our approach is to study a wide range of options for water supply, figure out which ones are the best for our community, and develop a plan to increase our water supply options. Next slide. So with this project, we want to answer 5 key questions. These are the key questions we started with over a year ago. How much new water supply is appropriate to mitigate the risk of shortages? Every drop of water that we develop is a benefit to our community for resiliency, but it comes at a cost. So we have to weigh out all of the different factors. Which supply options should we study? Because we're looking out over 20 or 25 or even 30 years, we're looking at things we wouldn't normally consider, especially because we're facing climate change. So you'll see a very long list of water supplies that we're going to study. We'll share those with you tonight. And how do we determine which ones are best? What criteria should we use? You'll learn tonight about what we're proposing to be the criteria and the method for doing the study. So tonight, you're going to hear about answers to those first 3 questions. So a lot of work has been done since this project started in late September, early October. Then, once the study is completed, we want to find out what mix of options will help us meet our goal? What's the best mix of water supplies for Santa Rosa's future? And what's the most reasonable path forward? We need a plan that can be adaptive. Regulations are going to change in the future. Funding sources will change in the future. Technology will change in the future. So we want to figure out the best path forward. Next slide, please. So we are engaging you and our water team and a group of leaders from across Santa Rosa and a wide range of organizations and agencies representing a wide range of interests. We're engaging all of you and getting your input on this process. Tonight, you'll hear about the objectives, the goals, the supply options, the criteria, and the methods. And then the study will be conducted. We'll learn about the results. We'll learn about some best mixes of water supply options, and then we'll develop a plan. To do this work, we've hired a highly qualified firm to help. We did a very competitive process, and at the end of the day, Woodard & Curran came out as our #1 pick to help us with this. So I'm joined tonight by Jen Kidson of Woodard & Curran, and also some of her team members. And Jen's going to go through the goals and options and criteria and study methods, but she'll start out by telling you some of the work that's been done so far. So with that, Jen, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Thank you so much, Colin. Glad to be with you all tonight. So I'm Jen Kidson. I'm part of the Woodard & Curran team supporting the city with this project. So to start us off, here is an overall look at the timeline of the project, which we've broken into 4 key phases. We began in the fall with establishing the planning foundation, which is the goal, criteria, methodology, and supply options. Those are the items that we'll be reviewing with you tonight. That information will guide the feasibility analysis during the first half of this year, after which we'll move into preparing the water supply alternatives plan itself in the orange box. So what have we accomplished during that time since we kicked off the project in the fall? We've had 2 working sessions with the water team. That's a group of city staff that have been really involved and know the system inside and out. We've had 1 community meeting back in October that Malcolm mentioned. We've had 2 stakeholder group meetings. And then we've had a study session with the city's Board of Public Utilities. And at all of those meetings, the various groups provided input on our approach for the study and the study parameters, as we've been calling them, that you will be hearing about more tonight. We've received really excellent input from these groups so far. So we'd like to share with you some of the key themes that we've heard. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's some of the top items that keep coming up over and over again. Equity is on the top of the list here. It has emerged as a really important consideration, especially from our folks in the stakeholder group. So we really want to make sure that we are looking at the need to avoid disproportionate impacts to vulnerable communities. It's so critical, and we're really excited to keep this in the forefront as we go through this process. Cost effectiveness has also surfaced as one of the most important considerations. And that also overlaps a bit with the next bullet, community impacts, which might include things like how much conservation would be required of the community, or what would the impacts on the actual rates be? And then finally, as you've heard from both Colin and Director Burke, there's a desire for diversification in the water supply and some greater independence for the city. So with that background, I'll move into the water supply goal itself. So I'll go through this step by step. It's quite a bit of words, so one piece at a time. So the water supply resiliency goal for our study is to diversify and increase city supplies to reduce dependence on Sonoma water, particularly during Sonoma water supply shortages or disruption in delivery. Specifically, the goal is to meet 30% of the city's water demand with local city supplies to mitigate the impacts of Sonoma water shortages. So you can see in these next bullets that 30% would look a little different depending on what scenario we're talking about. So for example, during a drought, having that 30% would reduce those potential large cutbacks that could occur. If there was a shorter term disruption like a natural disaster, that 30% supply would allow the city to provide about half of normal indoor water use. And in a situation like that, critical facilities like hospitals and firefighting would still be prioritized, and other uses like landscape irrigation wouldn't be allowed in that type of disruption. And similarly, that 30% would help meet the city's future projected peak daily needs. So about 7,500 acre feet per year in 2045, that would be on an annual basis, which equates to about 9 million gallons per day when we're talking about the daily peak. So I'll go into a little bit more rationale behind the goal, and I'll follow this format as I step through each study parameter. So I'll describe it and then give you some background about how we got there. So first of all, this goal is specific enough to support the feasibility analysis. So we want to make sure that the supply options we analyze can meet the city's needs, and we have a clear target to shoot for. The goal would provide resiliency and mitigate potential interruptions, as I just mentioned. It considers both how much water is used in a year as well as on a daily basis. And then because the goal is based on a percentage, it allows for flexibility. If our estimates of future demand change, the ultimate volume of water could change along with that. So if water demands continued to decline over time, that 7,500 acre feet from the prior slide could be adjusted as needed. So at this point, we're going to pause for some Q&A, and Malcolm is going to facilitate that. So we'll kind of intersperse these breaks to pause after each chunk of the study parameter. So Malcolm, I'd like to see if there are any questions or comments about the info presented so far.
Sure. Thank you, Jen. To do that, we want to actually hear from you, our community, about the information that's been presented so far. Before we begin that, Easter is going to review how you can actually participate. Easter?
Yes, thank you, Malcolm. Anyone wishing to ask a question, make a comment, or offer ideas can raise their hand in Zoom. Individuals participating in the meeting by telephone can dial *9 to raise their hand. We ask those listening on the Spanish channel but wishing to make a public comment to turn off leave interpretation entirely at the time you hear your name called, so you join the main channel to make your public comment heard and translated into English. The icon may now look like a circle with an ES in the middle and the word Spanish underneath. You can then rejoin the Spanish channel at the conclusion of our comment to continue listening in Spanish. We will then call on community participants one by one who have their Zoom hand raised. When it is your turn to speak, your microphone will be unmuted. Once you have asked your question or shared your input, your hand will be lowered and your microphone muted, so our panelists may respond to your question or comments. To allow as many community participants as possible, each person wishing to speak will be limited to 2 minutes. If we still have time for everyone, if we still have time after everyone has had a chance to contribute, then you are welcome to raise your hand again and to speak a second time.
Okay, so Easter, are we ready for the first meeting attendee to ask their question or provide a comment?
We are. We do have one person with their hand raised at the moment, and that is Joe, and I will unmute you.
Thank you. I'm curious if you plan on increasing your local supply to 30% overall. Currently, your local supply is a little less than 10%, and it's coming mostly from city wells. If you plan on increasing it to 30%, how will that affect the groundwater sustainability plan that's mandated by the state?
Thanks, Joe. That's a terrific question. And as you know, the city participates in the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. So that's definitely at the front of our concern. We don't want to create environmental issues or problems while we're solving a drinking water problem. So what you'll hear when we move through to the next section are some of the water supply options. Many of them, if they are related to groundwater, include recharging groundwater as part of the strategy. And let me just see, Jen, at this point, without getting into too much detail about the next bit of information, would you add anything to that at this point?
I think the only thing I might add is that this document will give us a high level look at quite a lot of potential options. It won't go as far as, you know, a design document or really establish every detail. So some things may be figured out down the road, but I think that's the only thing that I would add is we definitely are keeping that in mind and the health of the groundwater basin and referring to the GSP and all of our wonderful resources and the work that's been done. So yeah, it's a great question.
And that's terrific, Jen. I wanted to add, because I think you triggered something in my own thinking as well. First, I'll just say GSP stands for Groundwater Sustainability Plan. So for anyone who isn't familiar with that, and you want to learn more about the plan that was put in place by our local agency, the Santa Rosa Plain Groundwater Sustainability Agency, you can put in your search engine Santa Rosa Plain groundwater, and that should bring up the web page. You can go there and take a look at the plan that's in place. But what I wanted to add to what you said, Jen, was that you're right. This won't tell us which project to build or how to build it. When we get to the point where we would actually institute a project, we would go through a full CEQA process. So that's the California Environmental Quality Act. So anything we end up doing based on this analysis will have to stand alone and move forward as a project would no matter what. All of our projects have to be reviewed for environmental impacts. So this won't shortcut the need to make sure that we're complying with all of the laws and regulations for environmental compliance. So thank you, Joe. That was a great question.
Okay, thank you again, Joe, and for those answers, Colin and Jen. Easter, do we have another hand raised?
We do have another hand raised, and it looks like our comment is coming from Sandy, and you do have permissions to talk. It looks like you're still muted, Sandy.
There you go.
Good evening. I just took an informal survey of the presentations done so far. And as I expected, there are a preponderance of word modifiers such as assess, study, plan, collect, approach, words that are that reflect, I guess, where we are, which is forward-looking. There are, of course, many residents who are a little frustrated with either the absence of forward-looking or the pace at which forward-looking is being pursued. We've had multiple droughts over the last 14 years since we've been up here, and are more than a little frustrated that we do a lot of studying, a lot of planning, a lot of consensus building, a lot of politicking. Meantime, the Brush Creek back here flowed like the Mississippi River during these heavy rains, all of which go, it may not be germane to this argument, but all of which is not recycled or reinjected. So as we move forward, if I could request that some sort of temporal relationship be struck between citizens and the services that the citizens need to live comfortably with. I'll leave you with information I'm sure is not a surprise. I don't have the statistic, but there are a significant number of conscientious participating citizens who don't use the liquid flush in the toilets on a regular basis in order to save that water. And we'd like to feel a little better about what's required there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandy. Very thoughtful comments. Yes, the city, if you get a chance and you're interested, I do encourage you, Sandy, to watch the first part at least of the last presentation. We do cover in a couple of slides sort of a quick glance at all of what we've done to reduce demand for water and manage our water supplies over quite a long period of time. But we feel, as you do, a sense of urgency. And in order, though, to spend the public's money wisely and reasonably, we feel it's a really good idea to invest in the study. This is not a study that will collect much dust. Sonoma Water also is conducting their study, and they've taken some steps already to increase their water supply. And there are other cities in our region also working on this. So the good news is that out of the bad news of climate change, the sense of urgency and the need to respond is very clear to water providers. So I really appreciate that you have that as well. And if we're going to plan for any large projects, and you'll hear about some of those in the next section, we do have to be prepared that they can take quite a long time to put in place. So we want to have a mix of options, some that can be done quickly and some that will take longer time, but provide more water. So again, Sandy, thank you so much. And I encourage you to, if you do get a chance to look at that first presentation and see if there's anything helpful there for you in that information.
Okay, thank you for that. And do we have another hand raised, Easter?
We do not have any more hands raised at this time.
Okay, so Jen, it looks like we're ready to move on to the next section of the presentation, please.
All righty, thank you so much. So our next chunk, we've done the goal. Now I'll talk about the water supply options that we will evaluate during the study. The supply options fall into a few different categories, which are shown in this graphic, including things like groundwater, recycled water, desalination, stormwater, efficiency programs, and purified recycled water. Listed on the left are some examples of the types of information that would be included in the study. So for each potential water supply option, it would be described. We would talk about the potential volume of water that could be provided, what factors could potentially limit that supply. For example, a supply that relies on recycling water could potentially be limited by the amount of wastewater that's available to start from. And then we would include high-level information about what would need to be built and where. So the next slide will get into the whole list of water supply options that we will look at in the study. As you can see, we are keeping many options on the table, and I'll touch on this later, but the study will include a screening process to help whittle down this large list. But for the time being, most things are still on the table. So I'll walk through some of these items. I'll do my best not to read exactly off the slide, but I want to make sure to really walk through this information. So first, we have several groundwater options on the list, such as adding more groundwater extraction wells like the city uses already. Another option would be converting existing emergency wells so that they could be used full-time for production. Another option would be adding aquifer storage and recovery wells, which would have the ability to draw water out of the groundwater basin and also to inject it into the groundwater basin. So using the groundwater basin as a reservoir. Then we have potential regional options for groundwater extraction and that aquifer storage and recovery piece as well. So a regional project could include something like a partnership to use a site that's outside the city limits, perhaps, if there were a more favorable site located somewhere else, there could be a partnership with a neighboring jurisdiction. In the next set of bullets, we have purified recycled water options. These would consist of potable, so drinking water, purified recycled water for either direct use, which means that purified recycled water would be added back into the drinking water system directly, or indirect use, which involves an environmental buffer like an aquifer or a surface water body. So we have a couple options for where purified recycled water might be produced. One would be the Laguna treatment plant, which Colin talked about, or possibly a satellite site. Water produced at either of those locations could either be used directly or indirectly using aquifer storage and recovery wells or adding to a surface water body. This could also include a regional project, such as a partnership with other agencies to pool wastewater resources and implement maybe a larger project than any one agency could on its own to hopefully improve cost effectiveness of of a big project like that. Also included on this list is an expansion of the non-potable recycled water system. Colin mentioned in his introduction a bit about the existing recycled water system. So this would be an expansion of that system. Next, we have desalination, either brackish desalination, such as from San Pablo Bay, or ocean desalination. We would consider the possibility of city-only projects or, again, a potential regional partnership. Next, we have surface water and stormwater, which could look a couple different ways, but overall would involve capturing extra water during the winter and storing it either in the aquifer or in another surface water body. And then lastly, we have efficiency programs on the list. So the city is always working to improve water use efficiency, as we've mentioned. The supply option shown here would include continuing those existing programs, plus it would add greater incentives for things like toilet replacements to switch to lower flow toilets, or removing turf from commercial areas. So these would be strategies that we know reduce water demand, and they're existing strategies that are implemented, but it would be ramping up those programs so that changes are made as widely as possible. So again, a bit more information about how we arrived at the list I just presented. As you could see from the number of options, we are keeping a diverse list, and there's not too much that's been removed from consideration at this point. A lot of options are on the table, including many different types of projects, both city and regional projects, and expansion of existing programs like non-potable recycled water and efficiency. And lastly, you'll see this repeated, the supply options integrate input from the water team, the community, and the stakeholder group. So that information has been so valuable. We've really taken that input and woven it into the study parameters throughout. So Malcolm, at this point, I'd like to again pause and see if there are any questions or comments about the information presented.
Thank you, Jen. Easter, if we're ready for meeting attendees to ask their questions or provide comments, can you tell us if we have any hands raised?
Yes, first I just want to give another quick reminder. If you wish to make a comment, please raise your hand in the Zoom feature, or if you're calling in, dial *9. And please let us know if you need translation and we can confirm the translator is ready. And it looks like there are no raised hands at this time.
Okay. In that case, if there are no questions or comments for this particular section, let's move on. Jen, if you're ready, we can go to the next section of your presentation.
No problem. And just to make sure folks know, once we get through this all at the very end, there will be another opportunity for questions. So if something sparks a question later, you haven't missed your chance. So moving on to the evaluation criteria. How will we evaluate those water supply options that we've identified? So with input from the water team, the stakeholder group, the Board of Public Utilities, and the community, we've selected these 8 evaluation criteria, and I will touch briefly on each one. First up, we have cost effectiveness. So this is the cost of a supply option, taking into account how much water it will actually produce. So a very expensive project could still end up being the most cost-effective option if it produced enough water. Scalability is our second criterion. So what we're getting at with this criteria is two things. First, the amount of water that a supply option could produce. And second, how that option could scale if we wanted it to over time. So would it have the potential to start out as a smaller scale project or a pilot project and then be expanded in the future if needed? Does it offer that flexibility? Resiliency has to do with how would that supply source perform in the face of uncertainty? So climate change being a major example. If climate change results in more extreme droughts, how would the performance of a given supply option be affected? You can imagine that some supply options would be highly impacted and others less so. Equity is on this list as well. As I mentioned, we have heard the need to center equity multiple times from multiple groups. And we want to be able to take a close look at whether any supply options would have the potential to disproportionately impact a vulnerable community. So for example, maybe due to the location of a particular facility. Environmental performance would capture potential impacts or benefits to the environment, which could be, again, variable depending on the type of project and its specific location. We have a criterion here for legal, permitting, and regulatory effort. So the vast majority of projects are going to have permitting and regulatory considerations to think about, but the level of effort associated with that could vary quite widely. For example, some types of projects are very well established and there's a clear path to meet those requirements. Other types of projects may be new or may use emerging technologies or need a lot of permits, which would require more effort. Next, we have a criterion for city control and interagency coordination. So recall on the supply option side, we had some options that are city only and some that would be possible regional projects. This criterion would help us evaluate how well each supply option fits in with the city's goal to provide a locally controlled supply and also to work with its neighbors where it makes sense for all. And then our last criterion here is multi-benefit. So a multi-benefit project would be one where the project achieves the water supply benefit, which is, our key focus, but the project might also provide an additional benefit such as habitat restoration, flood management, or some other benefit that really is the icing on the cake to that project. So zooming out once again to talk about the rationale for these criteria. We started out with a much longer list of about 16 different criteria. So we focused that list to make it more manageable. We have consolidated criteria where it made sense and removed criteria that were overlapping with one another. We removed criteria that didn't need to stand on their own. So for example, our original list had several different cost categories, such as capital costs, operational costs, potential costs to integrate with the existing system or to train operators on a new system. And really that's all information that would be captured in a comprehensive life cycle cost for a project. So all of those did not need to be listed out as individual criteria separate from the cost effectiveness criterion. We removed criteria that would be considered a fatal flaw if not met. So one example of that could be water quality, for example. If a supply option would not be able to provide adequate water quality, it likely wouldn't warrant any further evaluation at all. Therefore, that criterion isn't on our list of what would differentiate the projects that we think are worth further examination. So we're left with a list of the key considerations that would differentiate the projects in a meaningful way. And I keep saying projects, but I should be saying supply options. A few less words here. And then again, we've incorporated feedback received as we developed these criteria. So now we'll pause again. Malcolm, are there any questions or comments about the criteria so far?
Well, let's make sure that Easter is ready for our comments and questions.
Yes, I am ready, and we do not have any raised hands at this moment.
Okay.
Just before we jump forward, Malcolm, I just want to see if anybody felt like it would be helpful to have the list up again. Is that something, if you raise your hand, I can see on Zoom who's raising a hand. Does anybody need to see that list again? Did we go through it at a pace that worked? I'm not seeing any hands. Are you, Easter?
I am not.
Okay, good. I think we're not rushing too much then. Okay, great, good.
Okay, and we do know that there's a lot of information being presented tonight, and that's the reason we're breaking this down into smaller sections and giving these multiple opportunities. And of course, as Jen mentioned, there will be an opportunity at the end as well for questions that maybe you didn't get to. So I think then, with no more questions or no questions on this section, Jen, we can proceed to the next part of the presentation.
Sounds great. So we'll move from those criteria to a little bit more detail about how they would be used and talk about the study methodology. So we've talked about the goal, the supply options, the criteria that we'll be using, and this is our fourth section, the study methodology. So how the criteria would be applied. So I'll walk through the overall structure of the study methodology. As you saw, and I mentioned, we have a long initial list of supply options. Our first step to whittle down that list will be to conduct a screening analysis. So the screening analysis would use a couple of the most important criteria from that slide with the blue boxes, and we would use just a couple of the most important criteria to evaluate all the supply options on that long list. And so those criteria will be cost effectiveness and scalability. And as a reminder, scalability, that's our includes our measure of the volume that would be provided by a specific supply option. The reason being that if a water supply option is much less cost effective than some of the other options, or if it can't provide enough volume of water to meet the city's goal or meet a reasonable portion of that goal, then it may not warrant further detailed analysis at this time. So we'll conduct that screening analysis and be left with a short list of supply options. What that structure will allow us to do is to really clearly document why options were removed from that long list. Once we have that short list, we'll evaluate each water supply option against the whole list of evaluation criteria. And so you can see really our goal with this process is that we want to be objective and transparent about which supply options may not move forward and why, while also keeping a manageable list that ends up having detailed analysis. So from here, I'll go into a little bit more detail about how the criteria would be used to score the supply options. Here we go. So beginning with cost effectiveness, that first criteria, we would quantitatively assess the life cycle cost effectiveness. So we would come up with a number in dollars per acre foot that would include you know, every cost comprehensively so that we really compare apples to apples between the different supply options. And then you'll see on the right here, we have a weight. And the purpose of the weights is that we can incorporate the most important criteria into the scoring most heavily. So for example, if we have a supply option that's very cost effective, produces lots of water, and hits the really, really key criteria, but maybe scores lower on something that is more of a nice to have than a must have, we want to make sure those less important issues don't overshadow the really critical items and potentially artificially drag down the score for a really promising supply option. So you'll see weights as we continue down this list. Scalability would be qualitative as well as quantitative, in that we would include the yield as well as that ability to increase production later. This was also weighted as high, and so you'll note that these top two criteria are the ones that will drive the screening analysis. Next is resiliency, which is also a high weight, and that would be assessed qualitatively. So it's not shown here, but you can imagine how there would be a more detailed rubric to get at the score for a proposed supply option against each qualitative criteria. We're still developing that type of rubric, but imagine for resiliency, for example, we would have, say, a scale from 1 to 5 with very clearly defined criteria for when a project would score a 1 through a 5. So a project that would be very resilient to future changes, climate change, would score a 5. A project that we know could be significantly impacted by climate change or other future unknowns and, would become less cost effective or produce less water would score lower. Next, we have equity, which is also weighted as high. Environmental performance, weighted as high. Legal, permitting, and regulatory. And then city control and interagency coordination are both ranked as medium. And then lastly, we have multi-benefit, also ranked as medium. So you'll notice that we don't have any criteria weighted as low. And this is one of the areas where we've incorporated feedback from the stakeholder group and Board of Public Utilities. If a criteria was truly of low importance or of low weight, it really didn't end up on our list of criteria at all. So that's why you only see medium and high here as metrics of the relative weight that we're putting on these criteria. Give you one more minute to gaze at this if you wish. And then I'll go through a few of the next steps for the project and how you can stay engaged. This slide provides an overview of our project timeline and many of the milestones and meetings we've had so far. So we are in January at our community meeting. You can see that over the next couple of months, there's a lull in the meetings as the Woodard and Curran team puts together the feasibility analysis and dives into all the great information to get these supply options fleshed out and start getting those scores figured out. We'll come back in May and June with some results before we go into the draft plan and finalizing the plan later in the year. This is our second of 4 community meetings. So the next one will be upcoming in May and another in August. And those dates are yet to be determined, but that's the general timeline. And at that May meeting, we will have lots more detail to share about the analysis. So Malcolm, at this point, I'd like to pause again for any questions or comments about the information presented.
Thank you, Jen. Easter, do we have any questions ready to go?
We do have, it looks like Karen has her hand raised, so I will give you permissions to talk once we have that slide up for the timer. All right, you have the ability to talk.
Hi, I was wanting to make a couple of questions and comments. One of them is about, does the surface water include finding an effective way to save water when there's excessive rainfall, like flood water, to capture flood water so that it doesn't wash into the ocean or become wasted in some way, to retain all of that? And to me, it also seems as though it would make a lot of sense to strongly consider multiple options rather than just one or two, because for instance, in a year where there was very little rain, that option wouldn't supply much water. But on a year like this one, it would be very helpful. So if you could comment on those things. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Those were great questions. I'll tackle the second one. But Jen, if you're comfortable, I might ask you to talk about the winter water and excess water and that sort of thing.
Sure.
So Karen, you mentioned multiple options. You are spot on. Our thought is that we need to diversify our supply so that we're in a good place to be resilient. So in some ways, by having things that recharge groundwater in really wet years, that allows us to use groundwater in very dry years. So stormwater could interface with our groundwater efforts. So we're seeing these as being things that could be complementary to each other. So we agree with you. We think we need multiple solutions to the problem so that we're as resilient as possible. And then Jen, can you talk more about winter water and excess water and what the thoughts are with that?
Sure. And actually, first I'll chime in on the second question as well, which we didn't get into this in tonight's presentation, but once we complete the analysis of each water supply option on its own, our next step will be to figure out some groupings of options, a portfolio, some kind of menus of how the city could mix and match potential options and have options that complement each other. So yeah, spot on. And then in terms of winter water, yes. So let's see. If I go back to, let's see, slide. Looking at our water supply options slide. So in this surface stormwater bullet, that excess winter flows, those winter floods, that's exactly what we'll be looking at. So for the time being, kind of everything's on the table. So you can see we have, maybe Laguna de Santa Rosa, other surface water bodies, creeks in the area. We're kind of keeping all options open for what may seem most promising, but yes, that surface and stormwater option is focused on taking those excess winter flows and finding a place to put that until it's needed. Anything to add, Colin?
No, I think that's terrific. Yeah, thank you for that.
Okay, and thank you for the question. Easter, are there other questions or comments prepared to come in?
We do have another hand raised. I'll just wait for the timer slide to come back up. Okay, we have a comment from Joe, so you have permissions to talk.
Thank you. Just a quick comment first. What you call excess winter flows, other people call habitat. And so you got to bear that in mind. But my question is, and I think you told us this earlier, where will this PowerPoint presentation be available after the meeting?
Thanks, Joe. The PowerPoint will be put on the web page, and then the recording will also, link to the recording will also be put on the web page. We'll bring up the web page in a few slides so that I'll tell you what it is, but we'll also put it on the screen. So it is srcity.org/our water future. And if you look in the past meetings section, we've got recordings of other meetings that we've done, presentations to the Board of Public Utilities and some others. And for the last community meeting, those slides are available. They're in a PDF file so that anybody can open them up and look at them without having to have the Microsoft software. So we made that available for everybody. Same thing with this one. It can take about anywhere from 5 to 10 working days for Zoom to send us the file and for us to do a little bit of cleanup on the, so you don't have dead space at the beginning and that sort of thing. But within about 5 to 10 days, business days. And then the other thing I'll mention about that is if anyone received an email from me with the link to tonight's meeting, you're on my list to send an email when those things are uploaded. So what I do is after each of the community meetings, I send an email to let folks know the slides have been posted, because that can happen pretty quickly. And then I send an email when the recording is up. If you didn't register, you're not required to, but if you didn't register, but you would like that, I'll show you an email address on another slide. You send an email to me there, and I'll make sure you get the same information when I send it to everyone else. And then just touching on the excess flows, sometimes we're so used to our water lingo and we forget. Excess winter flows are those that are over and above what's needed for good fishery habitat, scouring, developing pools, that sort of thing. So excess winter flows would be those that are over and above what's noted as being necessary for the health of the ecosystem during a winter rainy season. So for example, we don't have excess winter flows typically in a dry winter. But in a winter like this one, where we have many multiple storms, one after the next, we can end up with excess winter water, and setting that aside won't harm the environment. So I'm really glad you brought that up because we're also very aware of that. And any project we do has to comply with regulations around making sure that we're not negatively impacting the environment. So thank you for bringing that up. Jen, do we have anything you want to add?
Nope, I think you covered it all.
Okay, great. These are great questions. I'm hoping people aren't raising their hands because they're getting the answers they need rather than they're feeling like we're moving too quickly or anyway, we're so thrilled that you're here. So, if you don't have questions, certainly that's fine, but we don't want to miss this opportunity to hear your ideas and your questions.
And speaking of that, Easter, are there any other hands raised?
We do not have any more hands at this time.
Okay, thank you. And I think we're going to go back to Colin to hear a little more about how the community can stay informed as we go forward with the project and the options.
Thank you so much, Malcolm. Next slide, please. So again, we're very interested in the public's input. So we will have 2 more community meetings, and I will send reminders to anybody who is on my email list. So again, if you got an email about tonight's meeting from me in the last week or so, I've got your email and I'm happy to continue to update you. If you didn't get an email from me, but you would like to be notified about these meetings, you want to be on this mailing list, so to speak, you can see on the right-hand side the email address, waterresources@srcity.org. Feel free to send me an email there, and I would be happy to add you to the mailing list. It would be the only mailing list you get added to. So the only thing you would hear from me about would be when there's information about this study or meetings that are coming up, that sort of thing. So you won't get a lot of email from me, but I'd be happy to let you know when the next opportunity is coming up for some kind of interaction with this project. We do have some Board of Public Utilities meetings coming up. You can attend in person, or you can watch on Zoom and participate on Zoom. We're doing study sessions with them very much like we're doing with you, where we present all of the information and ask for their input. The community is welcome to comment and ask questions as well. So that's another opportunity for you to get your voice heard in addition to these community webinars. The City Council, as you might imagine, is very interested as well in this effort. So we will be going to them in September with the draft plan and doing a study session. We'll do a webinar with the community before that, so you will have a chance to talk to us about what you think of the plan. But when we go to City Council with that study session, that's another opportunity for you to tell us what you think. At any time, you're welcome to send an email to me at the waterresources@srcity.org address. And any comments that come in, I have been forwarding to the project team. So we got a couple of ideas the other day from somebody in the community. I went ahead and forwarded those to the project team. If it's a question about something that I can answer related to our water history or our other related kinds of things, then I'll respond to you myself. But we won't be responding other than saying thank you. If you provide ideas or suggestions, we're just going to give those to the team and let them chew on those and see if they can integrate them. If you're somebody who prefers US mail, you have our address here. You can drop things off in the office, or you can mail things to the office to my attention. So you see that mailing address is there as well. Let me think if there was anything else I wanted you to be aware of. Again, if you do want to be on that email list and you have not received an email from me in the last week or so, please do make sure you send me an email so I can add you to that list. Next slide, please. So we've reached the end, but we have scheduled the meeting until 7. So Malcolm, I'm going to hand it back to you just in case there is any more community comments or questions that folks would like to offer.
Sure. Thank you, Colin. And we would love to have any other questions or comments or ideas. Easter, are there any hands raised for people who might want to ask some final questions?
I don't see any hands at this time, but just as a reminder, if you wish to make a comment or ask a question, please raise your hand in the Zoom feature, or if you're calling in by dialing *9.
Okay, so let's give it a few seconds, and we do really appreciate the questions and comments. And as Colin mentioned, those are made available directly too when you send them in to the project team. So they're definitely getting a look. Anyone have a question, comment, or other idea? And seeing none. Okay, I think we are ready to move on, unless Colin, you wanted to say anything, add anything right there?
Just, I wanted to say thank you to the folks who showed up. Really appreciate it. And I look forward to keeping you informed.
And thank you to our panelists as well, and the interpreters and the hosts, and really a big thank you to the members of the community who are here tonight. And we hope you do stay with this project and continue to be engaged. And we truly appreciate you taking all the time tonight and going through all the presentations and listening to what this is all about and providing your input. And I think we will see you all next time at the Our Water Future Community Meeting in May. And as Colin mentioned, the dates and times for those and other future meetings will be posted on the project webpage. One more time, it's right there on your screen. It is srcity.org/ourwaterfuture. And with that, I thank you again and good night.